Welcome, alumni, friends, industry partners of the Poole College of Management. I am Frank Buckless and I am Dean of the Poole College of Management. This is our first installment of a new virtual leadership series. Our goal is to be an innovative college of management that advances business and society. This new thought leadership initiative connects our research to the most timely and pressing issues confronting us today. Today, we have Mark Beasley joining us on a conversation introducing strategies of the new normal and how we can learn lessons from risk management. I would now like to introduce Mark Beasley. Mark is our KPMG Professor of Accounting and Director of the North Carolina State University's Enterprise Risk Management Initiative. Mark has been with NC State for quite a while and was a member of the COSA board when they were writing their framework related to enterprise risk management, and also was on the advisory board when they updated the framework back, I think, in 2017. So Mark truly is a thought leader in this space, and I'm glad that Mark can join us today. Our plan for this presentation is for me to ask questions of Mark for about 30 minutes, but then give you all the opportunity to ask questions. So we invite you to send questions through the Q&A feature that you should see at the bottom of your screen. And we will then have someone ask those questions at the end of this session for about 10 minutes. And we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So Mark, let's get going.
Thanks, Frank. It's good to be here. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
So what I thought we could first do is just talk a little bit about what our ERM initiative here is at NC State.
Well, Frank, you know a lot about it since you were a part of the planning team. We were talking earlier that it was 2003, I think, that we sat around a conference room going, this enterprise risk topic we're hearing about, what should we do about it? And so now fast forward 17 years, the initiative, really the goal of the initiative is to be a thought leader, really trying to help businesses think about risk more holistically from a top-down enterprise view, but particularly helping them connect it to strategy. Because we don't want to talk about risk, we want to talk about risks that matter, those to the strategy, and really from a governance perspective. So I'll blame it on you that we have this ERM initiative, but what a great thing it's been. 17 years and hopefully many more of really helping provide thought leadership. And while we're here today to sort of help provide some thought leadership, we're still learning too. So it's a two-way street.
Well, that's great. You know, and one of the key reasons we wanted to go down this road was because we thought this would connect us to industry.
Yeah.
And so we have an excellent advisory board. So could you talk a little bit about the advisory board?
Yeah, of course, you know from the dean's role, the think and do motto of NC State, I think ERM initiative is just a great example of that. From a thinking perspective, we've got faculty that are really trying to do research on the area and advance our thinking and to learn from others to then get that thought leadership out. But it is very applied, which is one of the things I love about NC State and Poole College is we're out there with the real world. And so our advisory board that you mentioned, we've got about 55 individuals that represent all industries from many, many brands that are national, international brands from all across the United States. So the neat thing about it is we get these 55 people fly, well, they used to fly to Raleigh. We hope they will again soon, but they're coming from all over the US, from multi-industries to really help us understand what the challenges they're facing, to work together, and then to go back out. And so that helps the do part, as well as the work we do through some practicums that we do with companies, really informs us a lot. So it's a very circular kind of process where we're providing some thought leadership, we're bringing in people to learn from them, and then we're taking it back out in different thought leadership. So it's been really great. And they spend a couple of days, well, actually 2 days a semester in Raleigh with us that they're traveling pre-COVID, and we hope we'll resume that. But we're post-COVID doing Zoom, so we're still staying pretty connected with them.
Well, that's awesome. So there's a few viewers or some viewers that really haven't heard much about enterprise risk management. So could you just tell us a little bit about what is enterprise risk management?
Yeah, that's probably good to clarify, because the concept of enterprise risk management is really just focused on the three words: enterprise, risk, and management of it. So ERM is really designed to be more of a holistic, top-down portfolio view of my risk. And so a lot of people will say, Mark, are you saying I don't manage risk if I'm not doing ERM? And the answer is no, you are absolutely managing risk. But most businesses traditionally manage risk in a very siloed way. So my technology people are going to keep my technology system running. My attorneys are going to keep me out of legal trouble, and my treasurer is going to keep cash coming in the door. But we don't really talk about risk and how I could be, as treasurer, creating risk to technology and legal and on. So it's really just ERM is designed to be an additional sort of view of, now that I've got great risk management in traditional silos, how do I pull it together and look at it almost like you do an Amazon shopping cart, where you throw in things into your shopping cart. You're like, whoa, I got too many risks there. I better start managing some of these because I got a basket view. It's that kind of idea. So, and it's all trying to connect my understanding of risk, again, to the strategy. What drives value? And I'm looking at risk from an enterprise view to what drives value. So I'm paying attention to the most critical risk at an enterprise level.
Well, thanks, Mark.
That's a semester-long answer. That's a course. But,
so now let's move into some lessons. Like, we at the Poole College, we're learning lessons and how to deal with this COVID-19.
Yeah.
So could you speak a little bit about some lessons learned from the risk management framework?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I both have gray hair now, but more so than we did. But there's so many lessons being learned. I don't think they're learned yet. We're still in the learning phase, and you would probably, in your role, just the things you're having to navigate, totally appreciate the reality. But I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is, fortunately, COVID-19 has helped more people than before understand that a single root cause issue can totally trigger risk at an enterprise level that affects everything. So think COVID. What are we learning? It has affected my workforce in all kinds of ways. I've had to send them home. And then I've got to figure out how to communicate and connect them and keep them productive and get the technologies they need. It's told my customers, I can't meet with you. I've got to find a way to get to you in a different way than having you come in and let me serve you that way. Technology, huge demand on technology, because I need it now for my workforce because they're remote. But now my customers are overloading my online platform. Well, now I got a cyber issue, and I've got a liquidity issue in some cases if I'm not able to sell the product, or unfortunately my customer base is suffering, personally from an unemployment perspective. And the list just goes on. And on top of that demand on technology, I now have a cyber potential greater exposure to cyber risk. So the good news, bad news is for skeptics of ERM, if there's still a skeptic after COVID, I got to question how much they're paying attention, because it's such an illustration of a single event has catastrophic enterprise-wide effects that I've got to I can't manage the workforce without thinking about my customer and my technology. I got to think about them enterprise-wide.
Well, you or I, we've never experienced this type of event in our lifetime. So, some will argue, well, this is a once in a lifetime event and this will never happen again. So how would you respond to that?
That is a question that I think about a lot, because, unfortunately, there are people that are out there thinking, and they do challenge the concept, and I get it. That's important. I mean, we need to make sure we're thinking about it right. But I think we got to be careful, because in a lot of cases, I think we're just so anxious for post-COVID. Let's just get there and life will come back to normal. And they'll say, once I get back to normal, then I don't care about the ZRM thing. It's not important to me. I sort of get it now, but won't then. And I'm like, be careful. COVID is different in that it has affected everybody globally. There's no organization that's immune. So it has affected everybody. But an enterprise can have its own COVID by itself. So what I mean by that, I could have a massive quality problem with a product that could be catastrophic. I could have a major leader with a major reputational issue that causes a massive problem for us. I could have a cyber breach. Any one of those events are going to affect my workforce, my customer base, my brand, my technology. I'll have my own COVID. It just will be me by myself managing it, which is going to be even harder. So my point is, let's not fall prey to thinking post-COVID, I don't need to think about ERM. I'm like, be careful. There'll be another crisis. We just pray it's not a pandemic. And we pray it doesn't have a global impact. But the reality is, we're going to face some big crisis. It just might be mine. And so I just would caution us not to too quickly discount.
So now let's talk about, so how could an enterprise risk management framework help us in this new world we're in?
Well, I drank the Kool-Aid about 2001 on this topic, so you got to be careful because I'm a convert from almost 20 years now. But I clearly see that an ERM thinking, an ERM process can help us so much in sort of navigating this unfolding crisis. And as I said, we're still learning. We're still in the crisis. So there are several principles that come to mind that are really foundational from an ERM angle. So when we do executive education or consulting with businesses about how to embrace an ERM process, the very first thing we talk about is we got to talk about the people, culture. We talk about culture and leadership, and we say that is, in a lot of cases, we do say in exec ed, culture is king in the ERM, and that if you don't have the tone at the top, the leadership, the buy-in, the embrace from those at the top, your board, your C-suite, then culturally, you're going to have a hard time really navigating risk. So take that one principle, move it into ERM. The principle for ERM in COVID is we've got to start with the people. And I think that's where businesses had to. I mean, if we go back to NC State, we were getting messages from our provost in spring break saying, or prior to spring break, be thinking about your plan. So we had to think about our faculty and our students. That was the very first thing we had to think about. And so I think it's true that people first. First, we got to find out where in the world they are. NC State had to find out where are our students studying abroad, because it was spring break. Who knows where they are? We had to get them back to safety. We had to get faculty and staff home safe. So the people first, to me, is the first principle. And while that was our priority at the very beginning, it's a continued priority. You deserve a lot of credit. In the college, we're doing regular weekly touch points with the entire faculty and staff of Poole College, because you're realizing it's our people that are going to solve our way out of this. So people first would be my first principle. Moving to the second principle then would be, once I sort of get the people first, I think then from an ERM perspective, we always say, once you get the culture and leadership figured out, the next thing you want to think about is, well, what is strategically important? So we always talk about an ERM perspective. You got to first understand what it is that drives your business. What are your core products? What are your core services? What's big in your strategic plan? Because we say you need to start with your strategic lens before you go start trying to think about the risk. So instead of just worrying about what's going wrong, potentially, we say, wait a minute, first figure out what do you want to go right? What products do you want to make sure are up and running? What services do you have? What are you trying to do to continue adding value? So taking that strategy first principle out of ERM into a COVID world, I think the second principle is we got to get our eye on the main thing. That's the main thing. That being what is most important. So back to our Poole College and NC State, our priority, quite frankly, has been the main thing is our student and teaching education. NC State, we do a lot at the Poole College with research, with extension, with exec ed. All those are very important, but we pretty much sort of clear the decks first and say the main thing right now is education. These other things drive value, but we need to set them aside for a minute. We're coming back to them. We're still saying they're valuable, but we got to figure out what's the main thing. So I think we got to keep our eye on always not getting distracted, particularly once we sort of get the main thing up and running. We want to make sure we're continuing to keep it running. And with education right now, with coming back in August, it's still bumpy. It's still bumpy, and so we still got to keep our eye on the main thing. So, first principle, people. Second principle is the eye on the main thing. From that. Third principle in ERM is once I now know what my strategy is, then I start saying, okay, now I'm ready to think about what are the risks to that strategy. So now I'm moving into prioritizing taking that principle, say I got to figure out what my big risks are. So in ERM principles, you got to identify risk and assess them. Let's move that into COVID. So in COVID, we said, let's think about the people. Let's think about what's the main thing I got to focus on. Now I'm ready to think about prioritizing the risk that could affect that main thing. So what might I want to think about in prioritizing risk? Well, one would be what's got to keep the main thing working? What's got to go right? So obviously you're working a lot with all of us to try to figure out how do we get classrooms right? How do we get education in a classroom working? Whether that be in person, whether that be online or some kind of hybrid. So we got to figure out, we got to get faculty and student together somehow. That might be virtually together, but we got to connect them. We got to figure out what's got to go right. Then once we figure out what's got to go right, then we start peeling back saying, well, what could keep this from going right? The student coming in. What could keep the faculty from coming in? Now I'm beginning to pinpoint my most important risk. So what I've done is I've said, let me start with what's the main thing, what's got to go right, what could keep it from going right. Now I've got some risk, but I've identified hopefully the more critical risk because I got to get the student here. What's going to keep them from getting here? Well, they may not have technology access. They might, whatever. Same with the faculty, that kind of thing. Then the other thing I got to think about is just assumptions. I'm going to have to make some assumptions. So we're making some assumptions that our students are going to have access to the technology to be able to come in. So as I move across my principles, I'm thinking, okay, I got to think about prioritizing the risk to what's the main thing. And the way I start teasing out those risks are what could keep the main thing from happening, what could keep for what's got to go right happening, as well as what big assumptions am I having to make. So we're having to assume that students have access to technology and the capabilities to navigate platforms that we're going to be using and asking them to participate in. So those are three. I get two more, I'll tell you. So I think, once we sort of get to the, what are my prioritized risks, taking the principles to two more, I would say is, then I got to respond to risk. One of the things we hear a lot of times from people that have implemented ERM in businesses is they get executives engaged in thinking about what are all their risks to their enterprise, and they're sort of exhausted once they get their list, that they sort of lose steam. And so, that getting exhausted once I get to my risk, but then I've sort of lost my energy, I've stopped at the worst part because I don't know what I'm doing about it. So the next principle is responding to risk. So we started with the people, we figured out what's the main thing, well, what could not go right to keep the main thing working, that's my risk. Now I got to think, what am I going to do to manage those? And that's where ERM comes back in. The M word is manage. A lot of it's mitigation, but I'm going to manage some. Some of these, we're going to realize we've got to take some risk. We're just got to take some risk in having students in this building. But we're just going to have to take some. We're going to try to be very smart about managing it. But so we got to manage it. And I think in a COVID situation, one of the concerns I think I can find myself, even in preparing for my fall classes, you can err on, we're so used to doing things so well that we might fall prey to perfection tendencies. And I think in this COVID, the responding to risk is let's respond the best way we can, but let's not wait till we can get the perfect response. So I think with our online education, we're going to try really hard, but we recognize it's going to be bumpy. So I'm not looking for perfection. I can't, and I'm going to have to be willing to adjust. And so it's responding to those but I guess my point is be sure to respond, that we don't want to think about all the risks, but don't look for a perfect response because I don't know if anybody knows what the right one is right now, but we'll try our best. And then the final thing is we want to monitor and communicate. I got to keep my eye on these things. So back in the ERM, our last sort of piece of the ERM puzzle is once I know what my big risks are, I know what I'm doing about them, I want to monitor them. Just keep my eye on it. Can I just keep it and communicate that information? Because that may mean I have to adjust my strategy. So I'm back at the top. So, that's a long list of the 5 principles. But
So why don't we just really quickly recap those 5 principles?
okay, good. So first principle is keep our priority on the people and keep that the priority because they're going to be ones that help us navigate these risks. Number 2, keep my eye on what's the most important thing strategically and just keep my eye on that and not let other less important, but important, but they're just less. Let's hold on these while we focus on the big. Number 3 is then prioritize what could be the risk to those, prioritize the risk. Number 4 is be sure to respond, but don't look for perfection. And 5 is monitor. Just keep your eye on it, because when I monitor, I might be back to adjusting my strategy. So I start back at the top.
Well, that's awesome. So now let's just talk a little bit about, you've had some meetings with our advisory board for enterprise risk management. So what are you hearing from them?
It's been great. We've been very, very fortunate to have a couple of virtual meetings with our advisory board, and just hearing them sort of share their experiences. In a lot of ways, I'm very encouraged, because again, these are organizations that have already embraced an ERM process. And I think they're finding that actually put them in a much better position. They already had people thinking about risk from a top-down strategic perspective. They already had people meeting through risk committees and conversations. So they already knew each other and they were already talking about risk. I think they were in a better position. But there are several insights that we're learning from them. So this is back to that think and do, where we're hearing from the doers that's helping us think. So it's a definite win-win from this. But our recent call was in late June. One of the conversations there was to really think about the reality of we're still in the crisis, unfortunately. And so there is still so much uncertainty that we as ERM leaders need to not be too fast to start looking too far out into 2021, because the crisis is still so real. And the uncertainty is changing so rapidly that we're very short term right now. And that's probably okay and probably appropriate. We want to be thinking longer, but we can't distract. So I don't want, if I'm an ERM leader, I don't need to walk into the CEO's office and start talking about 2022 risk. I think that's not going to be what's going to be received well. That's sort of stating the obvious. So I think it's just recognizing we're still in a crisis mode where there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty. So that affects how far out I really should spend a lot of energy thinking about risk. That's the first lesson. The second sort of takeaway from our advisory board that I've heard is keep in mind, keep your eye on those risks that are just inherently very high risk. So now I'm getting into a little risk lingo here, but inherent risk are just sort of the reality of risk. So if I'm a bank, there's an inherent risk people won't pay back their loan. That's just inherent. Residual risk is what the leftover risk is after I try to manage that inherent risk. The point that our advisory board members were talking about is we really probably right now need to sort of pay attention. What are my big inherent risks? And then what is our response to those big inherent risks? Because I might find some of my responses tie to multiple risks. If that response, so those inherent risks in essence are on steroids right now. So that response may not be adequate when I've got several risks on the extreme inherent risk scale. So really look at those risks that are on the extreme risk and really make sure those risk responses are in play. That's sort of the other point is, because unfortunately, they're all on high. So if that response fails, I'm exposed in multiple dimensions. Whereas pre-COVID, a single one may be on steroids, not all at the same time. So it's sort of thinking about it that way. The third theme I think is we're hearing a lot is I think a lot of people are realizing as we come out of this, we need to think differently about business continuity planning. That a lot of our board talked about business continuity tends to be more pockets of continuity thinking. So for example, several of them talked about their IT groups definitely thought about business continuity to keep servers up and running. That was done pre-COVID. Maybe my production facilities think about business continuity, but they're realizing it hasn't been done enterprise level and that there needs to be a broader enterprise sort of governance of continuity, broader than how they've defined it. So I think that's a realization that they want to work on as they come out, that I need to think about business continuity more holistically. And there's there's definitely synergy between ERM and business continuity. And there are some on our board that actually have the dual role. Their ERM and business continuity are the same function, but we surveyed them and they were scattered all over the place. And it was lower level thinking or lower level responsibility leaders. And I think they realized I need to bring it up to a C-suite level is I think some of the main takeaways from the advisory board.
Well, that's great. We're trying to figure out what our new normal is going to be once we start getting through where we are right now. What insights are you hearing from your board related to what they think the new normal is going to be?
Yeah, it's a term we're using a lot, isn't it?
Yes.
We're talking about the new normal, and we're like, I'm not sure what that really means yet, because everything right now seems sort of new, and I hope it's not normal. But I would say, there are several takeaways from what I'm hearing. In fact, we surveyed our board 3 weeks ago on this, and it was interesting. Out of 50-something respondents, roughly 50 of them, 36% said they think their business model is going to change significantly coming out of this. That's pretty high. I mean, that's a third of, we're talking major company brands that our audience will know many of them. And they're saying it's going to be different. Now, there was definitely a fair number said maybe moderate to low. So it really, I think, depends on the industry in a lot of ways. More customer-centric retail, services, transportation, tourism, those are going to have a bigger impact. But I think what people are realizing is the new normal is our businesses may look different. And I think NC State, we're probably going to look different in some ways, particularly from a teaching side. We'll see how it comes out, but I can see our faculty are skilling up a lot on some pretty creative ways to do things more virtually, that kind of way. So that. Clearly, the new normal from a workforce perspective is, I think, stating the obvious. The workforce, new normal, we're all getting pretty, well, not all, many are getting pretty comfortable with the flexibility of remote working, where maybe I don't work all 5 days of the work week at home, but we're allowing much more flexibility, which really helps from a family, personal life balance. I think the huge opportunity for us is we can open up our vision of how I attract talent. I can have talent working for NC State and they live in California. Why not? For a lot of the key roles. So I think we could tap into different talent that maybe we don't have access to if we have to have them physically here. So I think that is going to be one. I think, we're going to see technology's changing. That's a new normal. Zoom, that's a new normal. We're finding in a lot of ways. I'm on a board right now of a nonprofit, and I think going forward, so much of our administrative tasks we're going to do by Zoom, kind of WebEx, more kind of technologies. There'll be still though where we need more personal interaction and networking, like strategic planning. I think we'll do in person, but approving a budget, things like that, we can do remotely. So I think new normal is different. I think the other thing that is just the whole online thing, I think we're realizing that the customer base is probably understanding more how they might access our products and services. And I think of my 85-year-old mother is a good illustration of this. Is she's pretty savvy on technology stuff, but she's figured out this whole online doing her grocery ordering online and driving up and having them drop them in her car. She's like, hey, I should have done this a long time ago. That I think she's going to say, why am I doing that? Why? I'll continue that. So it creates new markets for demographics that maybe haven't. It's forced a demographic from a customer base into a new use of technologies that may stay there. So I think we've got to look at where people are tapping in now and think they might want this going forward. And those will be a lot of, I think, of the new normals, but I think we're still exploring and discovering them too. So anyway.
Well, that's great, Mark. So let's talk a little bit now about, enterprise risk management and how that can be helpful in really starting to move looking forward in your strategic planning.
Yeah, and I think that's where we have to be always reminding ourselves as well as executives and boards that when we talk about enterprise risk, and unfortunately the word risk in some people's minds has a negative connotation, and I have to catch myself that often when I talk about risk, I'm thinking about threats, but ERM is all about opportunity. So remember, risk I need to take if I want to advance. I mean, that's true for me personally. It's true for a company or an organization, that we've got to be willing to take risk. If I don't want to take any risk, I'm not going to make any money. So I think from an ERM perspective, we need to help foster the conversations about, all right, we're facing these risks. How could it be an opportunity? Where could we leverage? Because we're figuring out we're managing this online education thing pretty well. That's an opportunity. How could we now expand who we can help on the think side? So I think the challenge from an ERM perspective is really pushing us to think about creating those opportunities instead of just saying the risk is a negative. It has that opportunity angle for us. And so I think, but we've got to be careful to make sure we're teasing that conversation out, that we're not just presenting all the bad things that can happen. That's where we can sometimes be our own worst enemy, I think, sometimes on that. But I think it's looking for those opportunities and figuring out how can we help get those conversations going, help ask questions like, well, where have we been too risk averse, or where are we being too cautious? Maybe we should take more risk. And I think it's helping begin getting people to say, and helping them realize when they've got a risk fairly well managed, you're okay. Let's now move into what we could be doing. So, from that standpoint.
Well, that's awesome. So, obviously all of us, many of us have been dealing with significant challenges and just trying to figure out how to address those challenges. And in some ways, I think we've been grieving that we want to kind of go back to where we were. And we don't like everything that's happened now, but there are some positives that have come out of this event. So could you talk about some positive lessons that you've learned and we've learned from this?
I can. It depends on what day of the week. Sometimes I'm on that negative side of it all. But when you really back away and take a deep breath, we are seeing some real neat things come from this. I think within the Poole College, we've seen a huge increase of communication and dialogue. And we're coming together more. I mean, we're weekly having college meetings, and departments are probably weekly too. And I think that's a positive. We're communicating better. And I think that's something that we want to find a way to preserve, because I think people, one, appreciate being informed. Two, I think they appreciate seeing one another, and we sort of miss seeing each other. I think there's a lot of that, we miss that. But so I say one of the positives is, I think, for those that have taken advantage of communicating more, I think that's been a positive. I'm a part of the NC State Strategic Planning Initiative, and so I'm on one of the task forces on that. And we've been talking about operational excellence. So one of the things that the participants on that task force we've talked a lot about is, one of the beauties of COVID is it has not eliminated, it's a little too strong. It has lowered silos. Because we're communicating more, we're collaborating more. And I'm less worried about my silo. I start realizing I need you. I need everybody to help. We all need each other to make this work. And I think silos have gone away. And that's one of the things ERM is trying to accomplish. ERM is trying to say, I need to eliminate my siloed thinking of risk and look at it more holistically. So, gosh, if I could keep communication strong after COVID, if I could keep the silo problem low, that would be huge from that. So I think, communication and fewer silos are pretty good. I think we've also learned the importance of and value of thinking out of the box. So I'm an accountant by background. You are too.
We don't tell that to people.
So we're both accountants, so that's probably obvious. But, we're not known for most people we like our structure. Well, COVID has taken away my structure. And so it's forced people like me to be more creative and to think out of the box. But then everybody's having to think out of the box. Gosh, if we could keep that innovative thinking out of the box post-COVID, think where we'll be. So if we can communicate more, we can collaborate more, we can think out of the box. And then if you can remind people like me at times to just be flexible, it ain't gonna be perfect, but be willing to pivot. So, you know, you talked about, I've been at NC State a while. Well, I think I'm finishing, let's see, year 26 this week, in fact, 26 at NC State. And then before that, had a career for a while. You know, people with that length of tenure sometimes don't want to change. And so I think COVID has forced people like me to say, I got to be willing to pivot. I got to be willing to flex. Gosh, if I could keep that mindset, and if everybody could keep the mindset pivoting, it's okay to pivot. It's actually sort of fun once you get there, that you'll be good. And then I think the fifth one, the takeaway is the reality is it is certain that life is uncertain. That's a certainty. So the certainty is there's just uncertainty. And so that sort of comes back to the willingness to pivot is I've just got to realize I don't control everything. I never have. I think now we've realized, I never was in control. But I think for people that like control, I'm pointing my finger at myself, I've realized I've just got to recognize and say, it is uncertain. And we say at home a lot, we have a neighbor that said, the best answer I have right now to everything is, I just don't know. I don't know. And I think that's sort of, I just got to be willing to say, I don't know. It's just uncertain. And that's a certainty. So, and that's never going to change. I mean, that's just reality. So, you know, again, communicate. If I could keep the communication flow, if I could break down the silos, if I could keep thinking, if I could keep people thinking innovatively and out of the box, if I can help them continue to pivot and adapt, and just to recognize we just live in uncertainty, and it's okay that we don't know everything. We don't know exactly how the fall launch is going to really look. We're trying to anticipate it, but we just got to recognize it won't be perfect, and there's some things we just won't know until we're there. So that's where pivoting will help me. You know. So those are, gosh, if NC State could preserve that, if Poole College could preserve that, if Mark can preserve that, I think things will still, that'll be some great silver linings, I think, from the whole thing.
You know, one thing I've noticed with our group is that they've really worked really effectively remotely, much more effectively than I think a lot of us thought. Is that also something that you're hearing out there, that you know, the remote working has been a lot better, and it's really helped people in some ways to balance things better than in the past they could?
I think for a lot of people that is true, but some may say it's true depending on certain times of my day. Now, I have the advantage that I have 2 married children who are gone, and I have a senior in college that just graduated. So I'm not managing a pre-K or an elementary school student. So I have a lot of empathy for my neighbors around me that are. I'm like, kudos, y'all are amazing. You're amazing, because juggling that, I just can't imagine. So I have the luxury of not having that pressure, and that's a huge challenge that we've got to acknowledge. And I think we need to be careful to not forget a lot of our workforce are in a different world than you and I are at home. So I think that's where we got to be really careful on this workforce thing. We've got to think about, how do I support them, particularly when they're having to now navigate their first grader in a virtual school. And, you know, they have to have this 10-letter password that has, you know, asterisks and exclamation points. And they're like, I don't even know what the shift key is. So I think for a lot of us working from home, so to answer your question, I really miss the hallway. I really do miss it. But have I been able to think in blocks of time more? Probably, yeah, because I'm not getting up and down as much. So maybe that's a good thing. But so I think for a lot of people, it has been a huge eye-opener that it works well. But I'm really concerned about those that have I talked about children, but there are others that have the other situation of an adult parent that's just a challenge. So I think we've got to recognize it's not my world is not everybody's world.
Yeah. So kind of where you are in your life cycle.
Yeah, I think we got to be mindful of that. So,
Well, very good. Well, do we have questions?
We do, and we may not be able to get to them all, but they
So
can
thank you,
be,
Mark.
if we cannot, we'll direct
Well, thank you.
the questions to our Poole Pack email, and that will be shared in our survey following today's webinar. So the first question that got a lot of votes is from Kara Green. One of our biggest learnings, Kara says, is that our ERM program contemplated each risk in isolation and not the convergence of multiple risks being exposed all at once. It caused us to add a specific risk related to black swan events and develop a mitigation framework that can fit such an event. How have others changed their ERM programs as a result?
yeah, that's a great question, because I think businesses are realizing that while they've been doing ERM, it's not perfect there either. I think we're still learning. And so your lesson is not alone. I think, for one, it's good that you've identified the risk in more pockets, but I think part of our job as ERM leaders is to find a way to elevate common themes. So when I see common reliances on a particular aspect, like my workforce or my technology, I want to think about that. So getting into trying to aggregate where we have overlaps of we're relying on the same thing must go right, that helps me realize that we could have a house of cards. That's a great insight. Another one is where I start realizing, wait a minute, this business function is making this assumption about their success, but so is this one, and it's the same assumption. If we're wrong, we're in trouble on two big business functions. So elevating, wait a minute, we're making some common assumptions across different pockets of the business. The part about black swans is a great question. The conversation we've had with our advisory board is coming out of, in fact, we polled them recently. We're seeing a much greater willingness now for executives to be willing to engage in more scenario planning, worst case planning. Unfortunately, pre-COVID, a lot of ERM leaders, and maybe this is what was experienced in your case, a lot of ERM leaders couldn't get executive attention to really think about a scenario that could be a worst case black swan, and executives saying, it ain't gonna happen. We don't have time for this. We got more critical things to work about today. I think they're realizing, ooh, that would have been really helpful had we done that. And I think the key when we do black swan scenario plans is don't worry about the exact scenario. So don't worry about predicting the, hopefully not anytime soon, next COVID-19. Just say something keeps me from selling my product for 6 months to a year. Don't worry about the cause, just something. And then think about what would we do? And so a lot of times I think with black swan scenario planning, people get too tangled up on the thing, getting the right thing. But if I plan for something, that plan ought to help me with many different root causes, a COVID or a natural disaster or a big reputation issue or cyber breach. I think the plan will help me in all cases if it takes my product offline for a while. Hopefully that touched something.
That was great, Mark.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
The next one's from Joshua Stone. Demonstrating ERM value during times of stress like this pandemic is much easier versus when things are going smoothly. What strategies, methods, stories, etc., do you suggest to evidence ERM activities as value added and worthwhile? Yes,
I've heard that line a lot. I remember a speaker from a very major retailer who spoke at one of our roundtables who they had a big event. And they said, it's amazing how many ERM converts I get after the event. And obviously we want to convert people to the idea before an event. But I think my advice right now is, it sounds like in that case, you're getting people to capture the value. If I'm an ERM leader, I would on the side capture that details of that. Don't forget the details, because you may need to remind them in 2022. So don't forget the great lessons being learned now. The other technique that we've heard ERM leaders use pre-COVID, but I think still applies, is if I can get other business leaders who now get it and buy into it to be a voice on it. testimonial, or they sort of, if I've got a skeptic, so let's say Frank's a skeptic, but I have another colleague that totally gets it. I might say, hey, Frank, do you mind talking to my colleague over here about how they've seen it? Because hearing it from someone else might be more convincing. So capture those great lessons, then look for others to be a part of the storytelling. And when I say storytelling, it's the communication of it. And then third, don't be hesitant to remind them yourself. And I think a lot of our role is education, and just, people forget it. So part of my job is to remind on that.
Great. Next one's from Marley Orr. Have you seen any general impacts on organizational risk appetites? It seems that many organizations may be forced outside their comfort zones by this event. I wonder if that is likely to promote greater willingness to experiment in the future.
I think that's a great observation. I like that thought. Yes, I think the answers to your question is, I think it has changed in a lot of people's minds. We're more willing to take risks because I'm being forced to take it. I initially wouldn't want to take it, but once I've been forced to think innovatively, I'm a great example of that. I'm being forced to go online, and I hadn't done that yet. A lot of my colleagues have been doing it for years. So they're like, well, finally, Mark, you're doing it. But I think being forced, it's like, I didn't have an appetite to deal with it, but I'm having to. And then I'm realizing, I can manage this. This is not that. This is okay. I should be taking this risk. And in fact, it could be better learning in some pieces of it. So I think the answer is, yeah, I think it's going to help us understand where we've been too conservative in certain areas. And we've been forced to bump up our appetite. In a lot of cases, we don't recognize it, but I think people in leadership roles are seeing, wait a minute, we really wouldn't have done this 2 years ago, but we're doing it now, and we're realizing it's sort of okay, we're pretty good at it. So I think it will change the appetite. And so a part of that is, to what you and I talked about, is how can I preserve that willingness after we get beyond this? Yeah.
How have you seen companies approach in-house risk training, given ERM is a company process with multiple roles and touch points outside the core risk team? And that's a question from Stephen Osborne.
Yeah, and that's what, quite frankly, the ERM initiative is trying to help. We're really trying to provide a lot of resources to help in that training effort. So for one, our website, which I'll selfishly plug, erm.ncsu.edu, erm.ncsu.edu. We have over 600 articles and thought papers, research studies, case studies on the topic of ERM. Probably one of our most common downloaded ones is, what is enterprise risk management? And I point that out not for you to read, but for you to share. It's a PDF, easy read. It's something that we've heard a lot of people spread, send it to their C-suite, send it to their board. It really helps let us be the messenger for you and education. And so just be aware, our website is loaded with resources. One resource that can be very helpful is a series of videos we've got. We've done a number of videos where we're interviewing risk leaders, and they run 6 to 8 minutes. So they're not hour, they're 6 to 8 minutes. Could be great from a training standpoint to be able to show a video that we've got. Now, we're working really hard and fast to put more things online. I would be saying, gosh, a great way we do training is we do training through exec ed, and we do that. We have day-and-a-half programs that are what is ERM, fundamentals, and then a little more advanced, and then we have roundtables and some other workshops. Post-COVID, we'll be back to doing that, but we're looking for ways to get a lot of that information and content online so that people can do some training on their own. And we've got a series of videos that we're trying to package. So give us a few months, but we're going to have it where there are short videos so employees across the company could watch these 3 6-minute videos, read this, and it gives them a quick overview. So hopefully we can be a help in that regard. And I think we already are with the website, but with more coming. So.
Thank you. This one's from Tim Wiseman. What do you think the challenges are to using the static framework and related ERM principles in an accelerated emergency, like a pandemic situation, when leaders are scrambling and adrenaline is flowing? How can we steer leadership back to the discipline framework to stay true to the processes and discipline ourselves to avoid knee-jerk responses?
I think that's going to be, it's a caution that, right now we're still, I think of it as we're in firefighting mode. We're still firefighters. The fire's not out. So that's where I come back to what Frank and I talked about earlier of leveraging some core ERM principles. And notice I only named 5 things. People, what's most important. Think about the risk of what's most important. Respond to it, but don't look for perfection, and then keep your eye on it. If I can just keep those 5 principles in mind, I think I'm still preserving the ERM core, but I've simplified it in a crisis mode. So basically, as I'm fighting a fire, I need to think about the most important things first. 1, I got to get the people out. That's my people first. Number 2, what's the main thing? Well, I probably need the most important thing out of the house before it burns. I do not need to worry about the laundry basket. So, there's certain things I just don't need to worry about. So I think it's those 5 principles. But I think we're also learning that from an ERM person lens, me, that we might need to rethink about, in some cases, we've maybe been too prescriptive in the details of what ERM is. And what's coming to mind is, in some organizations, ERM has more of a detailed, almost matrix or think of an Excel spreadsheet that has to be filled out, and people are, I got to fill out that ERM spreadsheet, where we burden the process. And those are ones I might say, maybe I need to let go of that one and keep it simpler. In executive, we always say, keep it simple, but move, and keep it conversational and less of the detail. So hopefully that touches on Tim's question.
Got it. Well, I think we've got time for about one more. Mark, what's the best way to leverage a board when implementing ERM? That was a question from Jane Key.
Yeah, the board is critical in this, and hopefully the board is engaged in the organization on this. I think one of the best things we need to do is take advantage of their expertise. So when I think about it from a board perspective, hopefully I can get their advice a lot on strategic issues, but they have a governance role, so I got to balance it. So I think getting the board engaged is really thinking about getting the most critical risk in front of them, but keeping it themed level than granular. And that's an art. So theme level might be I got a talent risk. The board needs to understand we have talent challenges, but it might reveal itself in that I've got to churn in my IT talent because there's a lot of opportunity. They're finding better opportunities. I may have a succession planning talent for the leadership level, and maybe we're trying to move into a new market space and we don't have anybody that has that expertise. 3 different dimensions of talent. I'm going to need to manage each of them in 3 ways. For a board, they need to know we have a bigger talent issue and keep it at that very high level and not overwhelm them. Our surveys and research shows that the typical number of risks that are being taken to a board are between 5 and 10, typically, maybe to 15. And they're keeping it very high level and looking for, instead of just presenting each risk individually, is try to put them together holistically, but then encourage their board to then do deeper dives through subcommittees on specific topics, drive their agenda through the year to make sure they're focused on the risk all year long.
Well, thank you, Mark. And Frank, I think we'll turn it back over to you to wrap us up.
Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate you participating with us today. And thank you, viewers, for joining us as well. A few kind of housekeeping items. First, involvement from you, our alumni, donors, and friends, and industry partners is critical to our successes. Hopefully you've really learned from Mark and the insights that we really have pulled from industry. We want to hear from you, so engage with you in meaningful ways. So please take a moment. You should be receiving a Zoom poll. We'll leave this up for a minute, and please answer that so that we can better understand how we can work with you. Stay tuned for information about our next installment of our virtual thought leadership series this fall. And you can read more about Poole Thought Leadership. We've just recently launched our Poole Thought Leadership website. So please go on there. You should also be able to get to our ERM from that website. Thanks again to Mark.
Well, thank you. It was
We
fun.
really appreciate this. Please follow up if there are questions we were not able to answer. Please follow up with our Poole Pack email, and information will be provided in a brief survey after this event. So again, everybody, thank you very much. We hope you all are safe and healthy and have a great rest of your summer.